Hi, my name is Julian, and I want to talk about web APIs. I'm super happy that I got invited to speak at Extreme.js. I'm still somewhat getting used to recording for online conferences, so please bear with me. But I hope you're going to have a great day. There's amazing speakers and amazing talks lined up. Like I said, I want to talk about web APIs. There's going to be two parts to it. First, I want to very quickly explain why I think any of this even matters and why I think it's important. And then I want to look at a bunch of APIs. And those are the APIs that I think people might not know, or even if they do know them, they might not know how to apply them to their products. Now, there's a lot of APIs, and 25 minutes is not a lot of time. So it's going to be pretty rapid fire. But let's start with the why. Why even talk about this? So it goes back a bunch of years when I was part of a product team where we fairly frequently got into the position where we say, we can't implement a certain feature because we would have to go native. And it wasn't really true at the time, but I think it's even less true nowadays. Over the last 5 or so years, browsers have done an amazing job in adopting and implementing new APIs and making browser APIs overall way more powerful. And this is what I'm trying to showcase, and what I'm trying to advocate for here is to have a look at the browser APIs and how powerful they have become and what we can use them for to improve user experience. More important than that, though, I think it ties into the whole idea of progressive enhancement and what it means and how it can be applied. And this is a quote from the Mozilla website, and I think they pretty much nailed it. Their definition is, progressive enhancement is a design philosophy that provides a baseline of essential content and functionality to as many users as possible, while delivering the best possible experience only to users of the most modern browsers. There's a few key parts here for me. One is design philosophy. So it's an active user experience design choice that you're making. And then it's all about the idea of your core functionality should ideally be available to everyone, but at least as many users as possible. And then continuously thinking about how you can enhance that experience by introducing other technologies for users that have access to those technologies, without destroying the core experience for users that don't have access to those technologies. Now, it says modern browsers here, and we're mostly going to look at browser APIs, but I don't think it stops there. It could be anything, users having access to other input and output devices. It could even be third-party integrations. If a user has an account in that third party, their flow is enhanced, but users without that account still get the core experience, essentially. So the reason why I preface all of this is because I want you to look at all these APIs that we're going to talk about through this lens of progressive enhancement, of how can I use these APIs to build on top of my core experience without destroying the core experience for users that don't have access to those APIs. I also think it doesn't make much sense to talk about web APIs in abstract. So I did build a small demo application. It's called stopme.io. It's a real thing. You can actually go to that website, play around with it. It's the ultimate SaaS product because we all know SaaS stands for stopwatch as a service. It's really just that. It's a small stopwatch app. It's definitely much smaller than what you're building at work or what you're building in your side projects. But I hope it's still good enough to kind of showcase how to use the APIs that we're going to talk about in a real world context and how to actually use them to improve user experience. All right, enough introduction. Let's dive into it. The first category I called observe the user's device. That might sound a little bit creepy, but you get what I mean in a second. The first API that I want to look at is the network information API. You might know the Navigator Online attribute. So that's literally just a Boolean that tells you whether or not the user is connected to the internet. And it has event listeners that basically notify you whenever that Boolean changes. That's available on all browsers and has been there basically forever. But it's already really powerful. This gives you the opportunity to say, to detect when the user is offline and show a notification of some functionality might not be available right now, or even disable save buttons and stuff like that. So if we look at our demo application, so I have the demo open here in the browser on my desktop, and I'm also streaming from my phone because some APIs are actually different. But if I now go here and I turn on airplane mode, then we see that it pops up a notification saying you are currently offline. And again, that's pretty cool. For me, it's a really good example of progressive enhancement because my core functionality wouldn't be broken if I don't get that message. but my user experience is definitely enhanced if I do get the message, and it basically tells me what's happening here in the background. Cool. Let's see. Network Information API actually goes further than that. So like this Boolean that you see is good, but with the Network Information API, with network connection, we actually get an object with details about the network connection. This is only available in Chrome and Chromium browsers, so not available in Safari and Firefox. Again, progressive enhancement. Don't rely on it for your core stuff, but definitely use it to enhance your experience. That object, when it's available, gives you a type. It can be Wi-Fi, cellular, etc. So you can use that, for example, if you have like a large download, you can warn the user if they're on cellular network, if they really want to do that. It also gives you information about like the speed, downlink, RTT, and it gives you information on the preference of the user's preference around safe data. So if they enable safe data, say on their phone, you can see that here, and then you can adhere to that. You can serve lower res images or lower res videos on your website if you want. So I think that's pretty neat. In a very similar way, or more similar to the Boolean online kind of attribute, is the page visibility API. So again, we get a Boolean, and this time it tells us whether or not your application is running in a tab in the foreground or in the background. So if it's in the background, document hidden is true. And if it's in the foreground, document hidden is false. And again, it gives us an event listener to know whenever that changes. And you can stuff like, say your application polls your server to show real-time data. If your app is running in the background in a tab that's not visible to the user, you can stop that polling. You can pause it until it's visible again and save computing time, save network traffic, even save like the load on your actual API server, because most of the tabs that the user has open will be in the background. But we can also do other cool stuff. So in our stopwatch app, we can say if you have an active timer and then the user goes to a different tab to do like other stuff, we can show the current timer in the document title, right? And we can, so they don't have to constantly switch tabs to see where the timer is at. And it's just like a small little touch from a user experience perspective, but it makes a huge difference. And it's just a little bit of code that we actually need to utilize. The next one is the battery status API. So that's very similar to the network information API. Again, it's only on Chrome and Chromium browsers. You might start seeing a pattern here. I'm not going to go into that. But essentially what that gives you is detailed information on the battery. So it's slightly different because it's actually a method, navigator get battery, which was also promised. That gives you that object. And the object has the current battery level, a Boolean on whether or not the battery is currently charging. And then if it's currently charging, the estimated time that it will take for the battery to be full. If it's not charging, the estimated time until the battery is empty. And those last two, like the estimated times, they're rough estimates. I think they're actually intentionally inaccurate to a certain degree. They definitely became more inaccurate in later Chrome versions. I assume it's a security thing, but they're still useful. And especially the level and charging are definitely useful information. And similar to the network information API, this gives you the ability to tell the user what's going on. So say you have a long-running process in your application and you have like a download that will take a long time, and you can see that the user is on a low battery level and not charging, you can show a little notification and say like, hey, you might want to plug in your phone or your laptop. Similarly, in our stopwatch app, if you put in a timer that's just way beyond your battery life, we can show you that and we can tell you, hey, your battery might not last that long. So again, just a nice little hint for the user. Next category is more focused on components. So if you're having a component library or design system that you're building with, these are APIs that I usually use in my component libraries to kind of just enhance the experience in them. The first one is the vibration API. So I'm a huge fan of haptic feedback, of visual feedback, of audio feedback, any kind of thing that triggers the user senses if it's used not too much. Like don't overuse it, and if it's used intentionally. So if it's actually used to highlight a specific flow or a specific event happening. It's supported by everything but Firefox. I don't know why. But it's also obviously only supported if the device supports it. So that's usually just mobile devices. But the API is pretty simple. Navigator vibrate either takes a number, if you just want to have one vibration, then it's a duration, or an array of numbers, which allows you to build patterns of vibrate, pause, vibrate, pause. And I've seen it used very, very nicely in stuff like banking apps, where they build like these fake keyboards where you put in your PIN. And this allows you to still get the haptic feedback of like a native keyboard as a user, which is pretty cool. And in our case, like in the timer, we can use it when the timer hits 0. So we just vibrate when the timer runs out. So the user doesn't need to look at their phone. They basically know through the vibration that the timer is finished, which again, I think is pretty cool. And it's the internet. So, there's whole websites and Reddit threads where people just went way too deep. And basically you get a list of Morse codes and patterns that mimic like popular theme songs from games or movies or stuff like that. So it's a really good candidate for like if you want to put in some Easter eggs into your application. Say like your timer has a name that's somewhat Star Wars related. We can use the Star Wars theme vibration pattern when the timer finishes instead of like a boring normal vibration. I thought that was fun. The next one is the eyedropper API. So this one gives you access to the operating system's native color picker. So API is pretty straightforward. You can create an instance, and then that instance has an open method. That open method returns a promise that either resolves with the color that the user picked, and then you can do whatever you want with it, or it throws if the user cancels the selection process. What it looks like on macOS is basically like this. And again, it's the native operating system color picker. So I'm not limited to like within the website or even within the browser. They can pick from anywhere on the screen. And that can be really useful. Like most apps have some form of customization options where we want the user to be able to apply their brand colors, for example. For the user to be able to have like their brand guidelines open in a PDF on the side and just pick from that can be really powerful. And it's also a really good segue because it kind of starts the whole almost as good as native discussion. So I kind of hinted on that in the beginning of like sometimes we might think for something to get access to some functionality in the native OS, we need to build a native app, and it's not really true anymore. The first API that I want to point out here is the Web Share API. So I think we've all been there, like building these old school share to Facebook, share to Twitter buttons that are really just links where we pass in the title and the description and the URL. Turns out there is an API to enhance that even further. So it still gives us the same data, essentially, like that we can share. So we can define an object that has a title, has a description text, a URL if we want to link somewhere, and potentially some files if we want to show like a thumbnail. The files thing is the only thing that Firefox doesn't fully support. Everything else has broad browser support, and it really, again, comes down to the operating system supporting it. And then we can call Navigator Share with that object. And what that looks like on Android, for example, is that it really just pops up that native Android share model. And that very easily allows me to, you probably still want to provide like that Facebook and Twitter button just for easy, very specifically to those apps. But then you add an additional button that says like, okay, share to whatever app you have installed on your device. And the apps will figure out based on that object that you pass in what they want to do with it. So it's very adaptable. And macOS, for example, also started implementing that on the operating system level. So even in macOS, you now have like a nice little pop-out that again shows you all the available apps that it can do something with that object. So if I quickly want to put something in an email or in my notes, it's a very easy way to do this. Now, very similarly, but much less supported by browsers is the Contact Picker API. So it does exactly what it says. It's allowing you to get access to the operating system's Contact Picker, but it's really only on Chrome on Android. It's not even Chromium, it's just Chrome on Android, where you can get access to that. And it's navigator contacts.select, which again returns a promise, and that resolves either with the information of the selected contacts or it throws if they canceled the whole process. And what we can define is the properties that we care about, the properties that we do want to read. So the contact's name, the email, telephone number, potentially like their avatar icon. And we can define whether it's single select or multi-select. And then again, very similar to what we had before, if we click on this on Android, it pops out the native Android contact picker, and it will tell us what website is trying to access what information, and then it allows the user to just select their contacts. And if they click done, the promise resolves with that information. So most apps have some form of invite a user or add a contact to the system. This is a pretty cool way to like still have your normal page where you fill in the information manually, but then have a button on it that says like import from your device. The last API I want to talk about in detail here is the Web OTP API. OTP stands for one-time password, and I think we're all familiar with like the basic flow of it. Like we're trying to log into or sign up for an application. That application sends us an SMS with a verification code. Then we have to put in the verification code to verify that we are we, essentially. And we're probably also familiar with the way Android and iOS for a while now have tried to make that flow more seamless. So if you get an SMS with a code in it, Android and iOS basically give you a copy code option to make it quicker for you to then put the code in. In native apps, it sometimes even completely skips that step, and the app just does it for you. It grabs it from the SMS and automatically verifies you. That's exactly what the Web OTP API is. So it's not sending anything, like it's not sending the SMS. We still have to do that ourselves. But what Navigator credentials allows us to do is to tell the browser, hey, we're expecting an SMS with a verification code. Can you listen for that? And when you get one, can you give us the code? And that's extremely powerful. So if we look at what that actually looks like on Android, for example, making sure putting my number in, it's now going to take a second for the SMS to be sent, but when it's arriving, we get a notification pop-up. And it basically tells us, hey, Chrome tries to read a message that you just received. So the caveat here is the SMS that you're sending has to follow this pattern of like, it has to include your domain in here so that Chrome can actually match like, oh, this is where the request came from. It matches the SMS, and it needs to include the code. And then we can just click allow, and that resolves the promise with the code. So I can do anything I want now. I'm filling in the input here, but like I could do anything else if I wanted to. And that's already pretty cool. Like I think that's a pretty neat flow to streamline the whole SMS verification. But where it gets really cool is now I'm on my desktop, and I'm on Chrome, and I'm logged into the same Google account as my phone. What I can do here is do the same flow. So now it will send an SMS to my phone. And now we see a different notification. It doesn't actually pop up, which is a bit of a shame, but we see it here. It tells me, hey, Julian's MacBook Pro tries to get a code, tries to verify you. So it knows based on the Google account that I'm logged in, that this actually came from my desktop session. And I can just hit submit, and it will magically send it to the desktop, which is amazing. Like, I think this is where it really shines. And yeah, the UI of it is not perfect yet, I think. So I don't know if I've really used that in production quite yet, but I think that's just a matter of time, of like more people starting to use this API and the operating system's UI for it becoming more polished. But yeah, so I'm slightly running out of time. So there's still heaps of APIs that I want to talk about. So I just added a bunch of honorable mentions at the end of my talk. So let's go through those. First one, I really just added because the last couple of times that I gave this talk, this is the main question that I got afterwards. Like, what do you think about Chrome's AI API? So the future of LLMs built in ? It's not available in Chrome. It's not available in any browsers at this stage. It's very experimental. It's only available in Canary. So you have to download Canary. You have to download the model locally. and you have to set some things up for it to work. But basically, what it promises you is to then have an LLM locally in Chrome that you can use for basic AI stuff without having to go to the cloud. And again, it's very experimental. This API will still change. But what it gives you right now is a window AI object. And then there's a bunch of different services on that. So language model is one of the services. It's basically just for basic prompting. So your normal GPT stuff. And you can check whether it's available with the capabilities method. And if it's available, you can create a session. And then on that session, in this case, you have a prompt method to be able to use it. Like I said, there's a bunch of different services. So right now, language model is for prompting. Writer and rewriter is for writing text. Summarizer, which might be pretty useful for summarizing text. And then there's translation related things of language detection and actually creating translations, which I can also see to be useful, but I don't know how it actually stands up against cloud services. So if we put that into our applications, I download Canary, set things up. When it's available, I show this AI button, and it basically allows us to, or allows the user to just put in a prompt of what they want to do. So in this case, I want to soft boil an egg. And I can just ask AI, okay, what timer should I set for that? You can already tell, like, I slightly question the practical application of all of this stuff, but maybe your application does have like genuine AI applications. So in this case, it tells me 10 minutes, which is pretty hard-boiled if you ask me. But again, like it's the idea of having your LLM locally, which means you can run it offline, you can run it without having to worry about where the network goes, etc. So I think it's cool to play around with, whether it's practical or not. I don't know. Authentication. There's a bunch of authentication APIs that have popped up in recent years that are definitely worth checking out. Credentials API allows you to use the same kind of credential storage that the browser uses for normal passwords and stuff for anything you want, and also then the retrieval methods using kind of the native browser stuff, which is pretty cool. The big one is the web authentication API. So that's the push for passwordless authentication, if you will. So it tries to use the native authentication methods that are available on your device. So that could be your fingerprint, that could be your pattern on your phone, or whatever you have set up is then available to the user to use as authentication for your service. So you can use that to enhance your password authentication or in replacement. Either way, it's very interesting. If you haven't checked it out yet, definitely check out the demo, definitely check out the documentation. It deserves its own talk, really. And then there's a bunch of APIs that I call the next generation. So you might not really use these APIs directly, but they will definitely be used in all of those libraries and frameworks that you're using to do this stuff. First one is the internationalization API. That's been around for a while now, but I really want to mention it whenever I get the chance because I think it's really cool. Date formatting became a lot easier when they came out. Relative date formatting of like in X days, in X hours, or X hours ago. I think this is amazing to have that as a core feature in your browser API, especially with the additional feature of easily switching languages. So you get like the translated versions of that in X days in any language you want by just passing in the language code. So that's super powerful. In a similar way, the number formatting. Like, cool, what number separators do you actually have? That differs language by language. Where do you put the currency symbol before or after the numbers? Like, again, all of that depends on the localization, and that comes out of the box now. Next one is temporal API. Has an asterisk because it's still in stage 3. It's not fully released, but I hope it's not too far away. It's basically, we've looked at the date API with all of the flaws that it has and tried to fix that. And this is the better version. The one thing I'm super excited about here is date manipulation. So like easily adding like an amount of hours or days or minutes to a specific date becomes really easy. In a very similar way, the navigation API is a better version of the history API. So again, we took learnings from the old history API and tried to fix them in this new version. So your React router or Remix router will definitely use that in the future. This one is probably just a me thing. I'm super excited about the URL patterns API to be able to match URL patterns against strings or like your current URL. Extreme fun, like being able to do that natively now. I think it's awesome. And then the last two are really more HTML than JavaScript. But I think they're still somewhat related and close to it. It's the popover API and similarly the dialog API to just natively or like implement tooltips, popovers, modal dialogues, much easier with native HTML elements, and you get all of the accessibility for free and all that kind of stuff. There's actually a bunch of talks later today. Adam is talking very specifically about the popover API. Definitely check that out. And Julian, I think, is more broadly talking about what new HTML features we have. You might not need to write all of that logic that we're currently doing from scratch. We don't need that anymore. Just use HTML where you can use all of the powerful new features. Very similarly, the view transitions API, it's trying to fix the whole thing where if you wanted to transition smoothly from one page to another, that kind of pushed us into the whole single page application thing because that was the only way really to do that. The view transitions API allows you to do that with server-side rendered pages, which again, pretty cool. Check it out if you haven't yet. Like I said, I'm running out of time, so this is really it for me. I definitely highly encourage you. Check out the MDN docs on web APIs. There's heaps of them. You can waste more than a weekend just diving into them, tinkering around with them, but it's really fun and it's really cool. And you find a lot of useful stuff there. This is a link to the slides if you're interested in that, and a link to the repo with the stopwatch app if you want to dive into that for whatever reason. But yeah, that's it from me. Thank you very much.